we still lift your holy name. All that matters in heaven on earth is you. Help us to see you with new eyes. Help us to come together with a new resolve. Help us to come in the presence of the Lord and draw near. You've promised if we will, you will draw near to us, and that's what we need more than anything else in this world. Holy Spirit, take over the service. Let your words be spoken this morning as you bring us heart to heart with a living God, for we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good morning, everyone. On Monday this week coming, which is tomorrow, we have our women's group, and that is at 6:30 at Chris Baylog's house. On Thursday this week, we do have our Bible study, and that is at 7 o'clock. You can either access it through Zoom or join in at Pastor's house, and we have still been going through the book of Philippians. And then on Friday and Saturday of next week, which is February 12th and 13th, we have the EXO Marriage Conference, which we will be streaming up in the loft. And Friday is an all-day session that's broken up into groups, whereas Saturday is just a morning session that lasts until the afternoon, I believe. And you don't have to feel like you have to come to all of them to know what's going on. So even if you can just come to one or two, it's not a problem. There are going to be donuts, so let us know if you can join. And then we do have our next prayer circle set for Friday, February 19th at 7 o'clock in the church. Thank you. The loft and the lookout are now dismissed.
Okay, so I hate to tell you this, but Alexander's been lying to you all. So I have to make some corrections. First of all, she was right about the loft and the lookout, though. That part was 100% true. You guys can put on your galoshes and head out. Galoshes. Does anybody wear galoshes anymore? They do still make them, actually. I bought some at the Tractor and Farm Supply. What is that called? Tractor Supply? Close, right? Not too bad. Up there in Belle Vernon had them. They're still the best things to keep your feet dry if you have sneakers or something. But they had them up there. So, yep, they still have them. So, basically, a couple corrections there. And in Alexander's defense, we made these changes without informing her. We've decided not to come and do the live stream of EXO Marriage Conference this year, just because with COVID, we had a lot of people said they didn't want to come to that, and we're asking, can we watch it online? And the answer is yes. This is what we did last year. So we're going to buy it like we did last year, and we will have all the videos available for an entire year. So if anybody wants to go through them with their spouse or loved one, then we would certainly give those to you, and you can stream it for as much as you want and as many times as you want, and you can skip the ones that bore you and focus on the ones that you like, and we'll make that available. But we just thought it's probably doesn't make sense to take down an entire day and do that. So we will not be streaming it this year, but it will be available this year. If you are interested, please see the one who runs the church right here, and she will set you up. You know, every cool organization has a foreign support staff. So do we. Ours is Ukrainian, not Indian, but still. Every bit is helpful. No, she's more helpful. Okay, that's one. Two, we will still be streaming the Bible study on Zoom, but if it does not snow this Thursday, we will be here in the loft for anybody who wants to come. Do not, Linda, go to our house. Zion will be there. Okay, you'll be joining us from work again? Okay. And we'll get the word out to Ty as well. He sometimes show up. We just decided we originally did that because we figured, wow, there's going to be a lot of snow and stuff. And then we did that, and there was no snow. So you watch. It'll be 15 inches dumped Wednesday night. But right now, we're planning on being here Thursday at 7 for the Bible study if you want to come physically. As always, you can Zoom in. And as always, if you don't have that information, see our Ukrainian support staff, and they'll hook you up with that as well. Were there any other corrections or additions that we needed to make? No. You're looking at me like you... No? I did? That's it then? Yeah. Oh, that's right. You probably know.
But I'll send out an email.
Yeah. Yeah, she's probably lying to you about women's group too, because you're probably not going to have that tomorrow. I knew there was a third one. Okay. Yeah. So that's the problem with those recorded messages. Sometimes they get them wrong. Okay, so that's it. We're going to finish up the series today on reconstructing your faith, and it is doing this to me again. So I will ad lib while I reboot the system. Anyway, we're going to finish this up today, and I can't tell you how happy I am. It's been my least favorite series ever. However, a lot of you seem to have liked it, so that's good. It's been hard for me. That's why I don't like it. This past one was really murder. I had to go through hours and hours of video. And this is the weirdest sermon I've ever preached. There's going to be so much video on this, and I do apologize. But this week, we're going to be doing the case of Rhett and Link. Two early adopters to YouTube channels, very, very popular. Their YouTube channel has 16 million subscribers. Let me put that in perspective for you. More people watch them in a week than CNN and MSNBC News combined. So influence there. So it is kind of important. Now they were never a Christian YouTube channel. They didn't portray themselves as a Christian, but they were Christians who did a YouTube channel. They're very early adopters, and this past year, they did go on their channel and express why they have walked away from the faith that they grew up in. They've been Christians their whole lives. Each one of them are going to take a turn at it, and each one of them talked for an hour and a half. So I had to go through a lot of video and reduce it. I've reduced it down to 3 minutes apiece, which was the best I could do, but that's a lot of video. So hang in there, stick with me. I will eventually get to preaching, though. I do not get paid to not preach. So, whatever, that's a lot of knots there, but I think that's correct. So anyway, so I will still be preaching. I'm not just going to let them do all the talking, but I want to jump right into it just because it takes so long to get through all the different videos. So about a year ago, they renounced their faith in Jesus, and Rhett's the one in the man bun, and he's going to go first and explain to you why.
Welcome to Ear Biscuits. I'm Link.
And I'm nervous. My particular, what we call a deconstruction story of how I no longer consider myself an evangelical Christian, it's very detailed because the things that were happening in my mind and my heart is sort of a particular thread that you may or may not relate to, but it is my story and I'm going to tell it. What it meant to me to be a Christian. Now, I believed that Jesus was the Son of God, that a personal relationship with him was the only way to be saved, i.e., the only way to go to heaven when you die. And this belief defined everything for me. This was my worldview. It gave me purpose and meaning. And I want to emphasize it was a relationship because as far as I'm concerned, Jesus was as real to me as he possibly could be without physically manifesting himself in my presence. That when you have a doubt about something, you go and you read a Christian expert, and that would kind of plaster over my doubt in that particular area for a while.
What time frame are you referring to? Are you talking about adulthood, or are you talking about as a kid?
This probably started in high school, was happening a lot in college, and then it's happened ever since. Mm-hmm. When I looked into this, I basically learned that no matter what scientific discipline you start from, the evidence points overwhelmingly to a world that is very old, billions of years old, to be specific.
There was definitely there's a pervading thought that I had that evolution is just something you stay away from.
I thought evolution just didn't make sense on its face. It seemed completely illogical. In fact, it seemed desperate. Then in 2006, I read a book called The Language of God by Francis Collins. Now, Francis Collins is currently the head of the National Institutes of Health. He's a geneticist who headed up the Human Genome Project when they mapped the human genome there at the end of the 90s. The subtitle of the book is A Scientist Presents Evidence for Belief. Pretty early in the book, Collins starts talking about the undeniable evidence for evolution. The main thing that this did for me is I had been told a lot of things about evolution. I had been told things growing up. And now I was questioning those things.
When you came to grips with evolution, was it just, okay, now I'm going to incorporate that into my faith?
Exactly, it was. And so I'm losing my faith in the Old Testament, but I'm also losing my faith in those same Christian thinkers who have said all this stuff that, like, guys, you this is solid as a rock. You can stake your entire life on these truths and they'll always be vindicated. I had a faith that was so solid. This was so deep. This wasn't this Sunday morning thing, man. This was a lifestyle. This was in my blood, and I let it go.
Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking in between these, but let me just comment on a couple things. So I don't know Rhett, never met him, but when I watch him talk and I listen to an hour and a half of it, so you get to know someone a little bit. He reminded me of something James Cagney said once, when a young actor was coming to the great James Cagney and asking him for acting advice. He said, "Look, the hardest thing in this business is sincerity. Once you can fake that, you can do anything," right? And it's kind of what I'm feeling when I watch him. I don't know Rhett, but I know 100 people just like him. They buy 100 books, they read 3. And they'll tell you they've read 100 because they've read the jacket book covers on 100 of them. And they really come across as so sincere and so well thought out. And what he says is just undeniable. In fact, if you listen to him, some of you might get a little queasy and say, wow, if he had a faith like that and he walked away from it, what about my faith? Because he sounds a lot more sincere in his faith than I feel in my faith. And so you start getting a little bit nervous when you start listening to him for a long period of time. The problem is he actually doesn't make any sense at all with what he says. And I'm going to show you this in a second, but the thing of it is, he says in this introductory video, I cut it out. He says, "Look, I'm a deep thinker, and I think maybe my mind just doesn't shut off enough. Maybe I think too much, and so I go through all this stuff." That's how he described his doubts. That maybe I just think too much. I do a lot of thinking, and I've had a lot of people tell me that. Right? I've never had a truly deep thinker tell me that, however. And in my work, I have worked with bona fide geniuses. Guys that are always the smartest guy in any room they enter, right? Really smart people. Those geniuses never once tell me they're smart. Never. They don't tell me they have a mind that really works. They just do. They just are, right? Someone who's really, really smart like that, you'll know when they open their mouth and start talking. They're smart. They don't have to tell anybody. But when I hear somebody tell me that tells me what they are is intellectually ADD, which is not the same thing. You can have a lot of thoughts and never complete any of them. So here's my concern with what he said. What he said was, look, I had a real relationship with Jesus Christ. Really, really. He could not have been more real to me unless he appeared physically, manifested himself in front of me. That's a good relationship. He was raised in the church. This relationship went on for 20 years. And then a stray sentence in the beginning of a book written by a man he doesn't even know talks about evolution being real, and all of a sudden, in a space of about a year, he'll completely lose his faith. Let me put that in perspective for you. I've known Victoria for 17 years. I think we've married 18. It just goes by so fast, hon. It's just like it was like yesterday. 18 years. I can't imagine anybody saying anything to me that's going to make me turn to her and say, "You know what? I don't even think you're real. I don't think you even exist." How do you go from having a relationship like that to having, "I don't even think it's real"? See, here's the thing that you can't escape when you listen to him be so emphatic about his faith, and that is either you never had the relationship with Jesus that you say you did, or you're just nuts, dude. Who were you talking to for 20 years? He's talking about praying and getting the answers to prayer and how he had this great faith. Who were you talking to? Because now you're telling me Jesus doesn't exist. You had an imaginary friend for 20 years, is what you're telling me now. Were you lying to me now, or are you lying to me then? Because they both can't be true, right? It can't be true. And the other thing that I would say to Link, if he were here, and he wouldn't be, because he has no interest. By the way, the reason he set this up is because you're talking to a U2 veteran. He knows how to insulate himself against the comments that he knows coming to his YouTube channel. And that's what he's doing, right? But I'm thinking maybe he should have finished the book. Because this is something else about these people who have this mind that always is working. They rarely finish books or thoughts. They kind of, like a bee on a flower, take a little bit and move on, right? And the reason I'm saying that is because if you saw him talk about Dr. Francis Collins, you could see the admiration in his mind. He is the director of the NIH. He's the head of the genome project that mapped the human DNA. In other words, he's setting up saying, this guy is real. This guy is truth. And so when he tells me evolution is real, it calls into question everything else I've ever been taught by everybody else I've ever been taught, right? There's a problem with that. The problem is Dr. Francis Collins is a Christian.
Certainly, evolution as a way of explaining the relatedness of living things is no longer in question. The data, somewhat from the fossil record, but more recently from the study of DNA, is incontrovertible. You can't look at that evidence and not conclude that living things, including ourselves, are all related by descent from a common ancestor. So that's the facts. What does that say about whether or not God was involved? It says nothing at all. It says this was the means by which creation occurred. But did God have a hand in starting that process? I believe he did. And certainly, science is about the natural world. If God has any meaning, God is outside the natural world, at least in part. And so science really can't comment upon whether or not God exists, for which reason I think atheism is the least logical of the choices.
So if he sat down with Link, he'd been shocked to find his book turned him into an atheist. He said atheism doesn't even make sense. This is the genius that he's talking about. And by the way, he's the real deal. This guy's a deep thinker. He is the director of NIH, has survived 3 presidents. He's not a poser like Dr. Fauci. This guy really knows what he's talking about, right? He went toe-to-toe with Christopher Hitchens. Some of you may know that name. He was a famous atheist. One of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. He debated him several times. Hitchens never lays a glove on him. In fact, Hitchens becomes so impressed by him, they become good friends, and they remain friends. Hitchens is dead now. He died of cancer. But they remained friends for a long time because he was so impressed with this man's incredible intellect, even though he couldn't go there when it comes to religion. Now, listen, I don't agree with everything Dr. Collins says, but I'm telling you, this man knows what he's talking about, and maybe if he'd spent more time actually listening to him. But I'm just going to go out there and say, without knowing anything about Rhett, I don't think he was interested, really, in knowing what Dr. Collins was really trying to say. What he wanted was an excuse to walk away from his faith, and we'll get to that in a minute. First, let's talk about Link. Now, Link actually breaks my heart a little bit because he's a lot more honest here. And he's very honest about doubts he has, and the reason he ends up walking away is quite different. So let me let Link explain it.
It's my turn to spill my guts, just to help you feel what it was like to be me growing up in an evangelical Christian environment. We were devoted. And we understood it not just as a belief system, but as a relationship with God. Like you said last week, that was something that we were actively pursuing, talking to God through prayer in a conversational way, really figuring out how the Bible applied to our everyday lives. But I want to read an excerpt from this one journal entry from this is my junior year. This is what I wrote. Lord, I'm frustrated about us. I just feel guilty that it's not clicking, like I'm just bad or wrong or lazy or something. I'm tired of feeling pressure and guilt to spend time with you. Lord, I would quit trying altogether if I didn't know how stupid and mindless that would be. To whom shall I go? Meaning, where would I turn if I turned away from God? And it wasn't just that journal entry. Like the vast majority of my journal entries over those years, it was actually heartbreaking. They were filled, and I'm talking like 80% of anything I would write. It was filled with me apologizing for disappointing God. I just found myself starting to believe that. I just found it most reasonable to believe that the Bible represented humans trying their best to explain God. And it was one of many well-developed explanations across many religions, and they were all accompanied by sincere experiences to validate them. Church, to say the least, church became a place of frustration, not comfort for me. I wrote in my journal, November 5th, 2013. Again, this was addressed to God, but it's the last journal entry that I've written. Here's what I wrote. Since moving out here, and that's to LA, and combined with Rhett sharing his evolving perspective, I have slowly given up trying to be the Christian that I feel like I've been trying to be all these years. I've concluded that I'm not going to do the things I've always done, the right things, the spiritual disciplines, and expect different results, intimacy with God. Or even more directly, I'm going to give up feeling guilty for not being better and doing better at Christianity. And this experiment has felt good, freeing for the most part. Everything except feeling like I'm letting Christy and the kids down. At this point, I'm not sure if God exists. But I still went to church with Christy and the kids. You know, I eventually stopped going to church, and then my family ended up stopped going. It wasn't too long after that. But the specific issue of the LGBTQ, the church was a welcoming place and a loving place, but then when you really got down to it, they weren't accepted as couples. There was, you know, you couldn't be married there. And that really ate away at me. But as we made meaningful connections with people here, I couldn't sit in the seat knowing that they couldn't, you know, that I just felt like it was a betrayal of my friends, and then of what I believed, you know.
Okay. So the final straw for Link is the LGBTQ community, which he didn't know growing up in Nashville, or I think Tennessee is where they grew up. But they moved to California when they started the YouTube channel, and they actually hired some because there's a lot of them in the entertainment industry. And when he says, I really can't abide the same way. So what he's basically saying is he's turning to Jesus and saying, you know, the problem, Jesus, is I just love gay people more than you do. Now, I wonder how that conversation really would have gone if it really happened, because Jesus would have gone, I actually died for gay people. What have you done? But that's kind of what he says. I can't be in this church anymore because they don't love people enough. They didn't keep gays out, by the way. They just wouldn't marry them. They were welcome, he said. They could sit there in the pews. They could worship. They could do all those things. They just wouldn't marry them. The church wouldn't recognize their marriage. That was enough for him to walk away. Now, when you listen to Link talk, you clearly start getting the picture that this was a legalistic religion that they were brought up in. He was always feeling he's letting God down and not doing enough. And he says, you know, I just got tired of failing all the time. And my heart goes out to him because I believe he tried. I don't think he's making this up. I think he really tried. If you listen to this whole thing, he talks about some of his failings and things. I believe he really, really tried. But you cannot make up for a relationship that's not there by work that doesn't matter. If I don't love Victoria, she will know that. And it doesn't matter how many flowers I buy her. It doesn't matter what's going on. In fact, everything I do for her, I will resent because I just don't love her. It starts at the heart. And the problem is they were really brought up, and they were raised in a youth group that all kind of checked each other. Right? They all kind of watched out for each other and made sure that no one was going off the straight and narrow. And he tells a story about once where he went off and got drunk with some friends, some new friends. And when Rhett found out, they're driving along in the car, and he confessed that to Rhett. And Rhett slams on the brakes and says, "Get out." It's like, we're done. Don't even talk to me anymore. That was what they lived with if you fell off the straight and narrow. I can certainly understand why after a little while I get tired of that religion, especially when you don't really love Jesus anyway. He was striving for a relationship, but it comes back to the heart. My problem, where my heart really goes out, is his wife and kids didn't get a vote. And his kids are now growing up with a father who no longer believes in God. And when he says, I stopped going, and shortly thereafter the family stopped going, guys, that's always what happens, just so you know. Statistically speaking, if the father goes to church, 80% of the family not only goes to church, but stays going to church. And in a family where the father stays home, it's more like 20%. People watch what the guy does. They do. They watch the leader of the family. And if he ain't interested, the family gets out of it too. But here's the real issue. He is letting his children now grow up with the morality of Los Angeles. I don't know if you've been to LA lately. That's a scary, scary thought. He didn't have that morality. He grew up with a strong morality. He may not have liked it, but he actually knew something about the character of God because of how he was raised. And he may have rejected it, but he still has it embedded in him, which is why he doesn't leave his wife. Even though he stops believing God, the morality of God, kind of the residue of that stays. His kids aren't going to have that benefit because he just told them, your morality depends on what the people around you say. That's a bad place to be. You know why? Because society always makes troubles. You know, it was society morality that enabled Nazis. Hitler didn't take over in a coup, you know. He was elected. He was elected. They passed laws to exterminate the Jews. Their society was okay with it. Is that okay by anybody's measure? Not to us, but their society says it was. This is what happens when we let society decide morality. Society cannot decide morality. All they can do is come up with the rules they're going to follow. And his kids are going to be in that world. They're not going to grow up with loyalty to their wives and husbands. They're going to grow up with a society of friends with benefits. And whatever fits you at the time, do. They can't even decide what sex they are. That's a very shiftless society. That's where they are. But I had a lot of stuff I was going to say about the whole LBG, the gay thing. I always have to figure out what those letters are. Lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and queer, right? So I was to do that. So I had a lot I was going to say on, because I actually, in high school, I was in drama. I was going to graduate from high school, go to Carnegie Mellon University, get a major in drama, and go to New York and go to Broadway. That was my dream when I was in high school, believe it or not. And so part of that is I was involved in theater in the area. We used to have a lot of theater in the area. It used to be McKeesport Little Theater. Over McKeesport, there was one in Clareton, believe it or not, a Little Lake Dinner Theater up in Canonsburg. We had a lot of them. And I'd go around, and you got to know everybody pretty quick. And half of my friends were gay, easily half. And especially if you were in a musical, like most of the cast was gay. And so I got to know them very, very well. I went to after parties with them. I went to dinner with them. I called them. We talked. I knew them. And there's a lot I was going to say about that. But instead, I found somebody else to talk about this. This is Jackie Hill, another video, I'm sorry. But listen to her because she wrote a best-selling book called Gay Girl, Good God. And she talks about her life as a lesbian and the person who came and talked to her and pulled her out of it.
What I would say to someone, a young lady or older woman or male, anybody struggling with like same-sex attraction, it's natural for us to have affections for things that God isn't pleased with. And I don't say natural in like a affirming that it's okay way, but that, yeah, you're going to see that in you possibly. But I think the church in some instances has made it seem, one, we've like kind of like separated homosexuality and just like, this is your only issue, when really your issue is your heart and dealing with that. Because if God was to just completely save you from homosexuality, but not give you the power to walk by the Spirit and everything, you'll still be a liar. You'll still be a masturbator, probably, porn addict, probably, bitter, probably. You know what I'm saying? So even just seeing like we are holistically in need of God in every area, not just homosexuality. And so recognizing that and also knowing and seeing that God has never I don't know in scripture, I could be wrong, but I haven't seen where God has promised to remove our temptations. But I do see a massive amount of evidence that God has promised to give us the power to flee them and not give in to them. And I think seeing God as beautiful and as worthy will give us some motivation to do that either. By his grace, of course, he has to change our hearts and give us the will to want to do that. But seeing that like, okay, if you are tempted as a Christian, if you are a believer, have repented of your sins, God has filled you with your spirit, with his spirit, and you see fruit in your life, yet you are still dealing with these temptations. What the enemy or the devil will do or people will do is because you're tempted, you'll automatically think, I must still be gay because I feel this way. It's like, no, you're human. This is what it is. But you are a child of God, and God is gracious and has given you the power to not walk in that anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to remember that God is worthy. He really is good. He really is beautiful. Because even I can testify, and people I've had conversations with, even when they were fulfilling the lust of the flesh and walking in homosexuality, they never had peace. They never had joy. So it's like, don't give in to the lie that will make you happy, because it didn't before.
Here's the thing that Link needs to know that Jackie Hill does, and that's letting people die in their sin is not an act of love. I don't know if you guys know who this is, but there was a guy named Nicky Cruz. He was the kind of the star antagonist of a book called The Cross and the Switchblade by David Wilkerson. It's a true story about David Wilkerson, who goes into the gangs of New York City because he just felt called. And he saw a picture of Nicky Cruz on trial for murder, and of course he was guilty. Nicky Cruz was the warlord of the Mau Mau gang, and had committed multiple murders. He was on trial for one, and so David Wilkerson just packed everything up in his car and went. He was just a young pastor, and he went to New York City to try to reach the gangs. He almost was killed many times, but he had a gang ministry, and in fact, it's still going on to this day. But eventually, after a lot of back and forth, he did reach Nicky, and Nicky gave his life to the Lord. And when Nicky Cruz, just felt God's forgiveness of his life, he just felt such a release, and he went back to the gang clubhouse to gather up his things because he knew he was never coming back here again. And he met up with his girlfriend, his gang girlfriend. Now, if you know how those gangs work, girlfriends get assigned. But since he was the warlord of the gang, which is like third in position of power, he got to pick his girl. And so they had been together for some time. Anyway, so she sees him and she wants to know what's going on. He says, I've been saved. Jesus saved me. I'm packing my stuff up. I'm never coming back here again. She says, you got saved. That's great. I'm a Christian too. And he stopped and looked at her and says, you're a Christian? She says, yeah, I was raised in church. I'm a Christian. He says, you never said anything about that. She says, no, of course I couldn't say anything in the gang, but I've been praying for a chance to talk to you. So here we are. Now we can be together outside the gang. That's great. He says, you knew who Jesus was, and you knew I was going to hell, and you said nothing? You were okay with me going to hell? That was all right with you so you could stay in the gang? He said, get out of my sight. I never want to see you again. Because that's the proper reaction. And there might come a time when one of Link's gay friends really needs to talk to somebody who could teach them Jesus and talk about Jesus, but Link has nothing to offer anymore. And that's really, really sad. So let me just talk about one thing. One thing they both said, if you catch it, Link was very specific. This happened when I moved to L.A. Again, Rhett's better at hiding things, so he says this went on for long, but all this happens after they moved to L.A. And I want to show you a video about a guy who knew them right before they moved to L.A. They were part of an organization called CRU, which is CRU, and it's a young person's organization, and they were actually kind of evangelists that went from event to event because they're really funny, they're very talented, and they would do these little skits and things in order to show how you can bring Jesus to people in ways that weren't at all threatening. And so this guy here, Shelby Abbott, was a director of CRU, and they were planning to do something together next year when this all happens.
We had decided at the end of that time to kind of work together the next year at the Big Break Conference, where they would do evangelism training and I would MC, but we'd integrate and overlap and do things together. But not too long after that, they had decided to leave staff with CRU and go into the entertainment business. And I wished them well, and I knew that they were leaving to go be a light into the Hollywood world for Jesus Christ. And I saw their popularity gaining over time. They were one of the first people on YouTube, and they doubled down. They poured into that, and they were right. It was one of those investments that they decided to put all their chips on, and it paid off big.
Yeah. Okay. So they went to Hollywood to be a light. Let me just say something. I know some people go to L.A. I know Christians who went to L.A. I'm just going to tell you this. No one goes to Hollywood to be the light. You go to Hollywood so the light shines on you. I've had a lot of people tell me God sent them to L.A., and they all crater there. They don't change Hollywood. Have you noticed Hollywood doesn't change? Hollywood changes them. Because they are really going secretly to be a star. Now, it works for these guys. After they came out, leaving Christianity, they're getting movie stars on their little interview show now. It cost them nothing to deny Jesus. It would have cost them everything to take a stand for Jesus. So I'm not quite believing some of the sincerity about this deconversion. I think they made their decision. And their decision is, yeah, well, this is how it has to happen. They went to Hollywood to be light. Here's the problem. There's all kinds of scriptures that warn us not to do that. Do not be deceived, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15. Bad company corrupts good morals. What do you think is going to happen? You're surrounded by unbelievers. Now, I'm not saying God never calls anybody to Hollywood. Maybe they do. But chances are they don't. The person you're talking to wasn't called by God. Because God never calls somebody to go be a star in Hollywood. See, that's what the people think. I'm going to kind of keep my Christian hidden. I'm a Christian ninja. It's a stealth-Christianity. They don't know it's there, but it's there. I'm waiting for my moment. I'm going to pop out. I'm going to zap them with some evangelism. Until then, I'm going to keep it quiet, right? That's never God's plan. In fact, Jesus says quite the opposite. He says this. He says, you are the salt of the earth. But salt that loses its flavor is useless. It's good for nothing but being thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world, and a city that's set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do you light a light and then put it under a basket. No, you put it on a lampstand so it gives light to all who are in the house. Jesus doesn't say go and hide your light until the moment you can pull it out. He says you need to know if you're living according to me, your life's going to stand out. They're going to know your mind because you have a light in you. By the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but when the black girl, I forget her first name now, Jackie Hill, when she's talking, man, there's a light coming out of her, isn't there? She just like, boom, it lights up. She wasn't like that, by the way, when she was a lesbian. I've seen some videos, pictures. It's different now. The light is in her. You can see it. That's what you're supposed to be. And if you don't have that kind of light, stay out of the darkness, because all you are is a dim bulb in the darkness. That's not going to help anybody. And it's going to ruin you. They went there in order to pursue stardom. They got their stardom, but they lost their soul in the process. I think that was a bad trade. We're told by Jesus that we're supposed to be different. We're supposed to be separate. In fact, Paul in 2 Corinthians 6 says this, don't be yoked with unbelievers. We use this all the time in marriage counseling, but this is actually not a marriage counseling verse. It's a friendship verse. What does righteousness and lawlessness share together? What does light have in common with darkness? What harmony does Christ have with Belial? Belial is just the god of this world. What does a believer share with an unbeliever? What agreement does the temple of God have with idols? For we are the temple of the living God, just as God said, I will dwell among them, and I will walk among them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore come out from their midst and be separate. Separate, by the way, there's another word for that, sanctified. That's what God, when he says he sanctifies something, it pulls out, it's separate. You're supposed to be separate from the world, not in it. You're not supposed to be you're not supposed to be invisible in the world. You're not supposed to go in the world. People don't even know you're saved because you act like everybody else in the world. No, that's not how this is supposed to work. And if you can't handle that, you need to come away from the world. You need to get sanctified. Do not touch what's unclean, says the Lord. I will welcome you. I will be a father to you. You shall be the sons and daughters to me, says the Lord Almighty. But he says, I'm going to do that because you're coming out from the world, not because you're staying in the world. But we don't want that. What we want is to pursue our dream and have God bless it. I can't tell you how many Christians I met in my life who are doing their will in God's name, and it is not the same thing. Unfortunately, the church today tells you that's what you want to do. In fact, the church today tells you, hey, God put that dream in your heart so you could go achieve it. No, God called you out from the world to sanctify you. That's the first thing that he wants to do. He wants to call you out and away. We're not supposed to blend in. We're supposed to stand out. But here's the really scary thing to me about watching this is that there are families involved in these two men's lives. Now, they're going to be given a lot of money. Their kids will grow up wanting nothing in the physical world. They have nice houses. They'll have cars on their 16th birthday. They'll have incredible parties with their friends. They will have everything money can buy them because, believe me, Rhett and Link are doing just fine with 16 million subscribers. They're doing just fine. But the problem is those poor kids are growing up, adopting the morals of California in place of the morals of God. You want to know where that ends? Got a story for you from the Bible. There's this guy named Lot. Lot is the nephew of Abraham. Abraham is the beginning of everything for us, right? He's the father of Israel. Lot's father dies early. This is before we even joined the story. His father dies, and in those days, you're done. You don't have a father, you have nothing. There's no inheritance coming to you. There's no one looking out for you. You're an orphan. You're done. But his uncle was a guy named Abraham. And Abraham takes him in as his own and raises him as his own and says, I will give you part of my inheritance. So that's pretty good. And shortly after that, God comes to Abraham and says, arise and go. I'm going to make you the father of Israel. Now, Abraham doesn't have any kids, so he rises and goes, and he takes Lot with him. Now, Lot gets to watch the relationship between Abraham and God over a course of many years. And God leads them there without fail. And when they get there, God blesses the sandals off of them. They have so much stuff. They're so prosperous that Lot gets his own servants and sets up his own household. And Abraham sets up his household. And they have flocks that are multiplying so fast they're running into each other. And the servants start fighting. And Abraham says, this isn't good. We're supposed to be family. Our servants should be fighting amongst themselves. And so Abraham, being an incredibly generous man, comes to Lot and says, you know what? This is a big promised land God's given us. There's no reason why we should be crammed in here, stepping on each other. You take a look around 360 degrees and you pick wherever you want to go. And I'll go in the opposite direction. He gives him first pick, which is incredible. He really shouldn't do that. He should pick whatever he wants and give him what's left. But no, you have whatever you want. And Lot looked around and saw the whole plain of Jordan all the way to the Zoar, and it was well watered. It was well watered because there were cities there. It wasn't wilderness. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of Jordan and set out towards the east, and the two men parted company. And then the Bible gives us one little tiny footnote to that. Abraham went over to the land of Canaan on the other side, where Lot lived among the cities of the plain. He pitches tents near the city called Sodom. Now, the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. You may have heard of Sodom and Gomorrah. In fact, we still have a word that we use in our world today, sodomy, right? Basically, if you could picture Vegas at its worst, Sodom was worse. It's like the most corrupt, evil place you can imagine. When you hear, and the Bible goes into some of the stuff they were doing later, it was incredible. There was no perversity too great for them to try. Very, very, very perverse sexual community too. They tried everything there. Anything, everything, doesn't matter. Lot pitches his tent so when he wakes up in the morning, he can see the city of Sodom. Why do you do that? Of all the places to see in the morning, because he's interested in it. Wonder what those crazy sinners are doing today. I'm not going to go to Sodom, of course. I'm going to be a light. I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to pitch my tent looking at Sodom. I'm not going there. Of course not. I'm righteous. But that's not how it works out for Lot, because once you start looking at something, it starts pulling you in. My dad tells a story about how he was giving Noah's dad a lesson in riding a bicycle up in the high school, up EF high school. And he put Ted on the bike, and he's running behind him. He said, okay, start pedaling. And Ted starts pedaling, and he could tell he had it. Some of you dads have been through this. And then he lets go, and he watches this whole parking lot. There is one sign in the middle that talks about unauthorized parking, and it's that thick. And Ted was nowhere near it. His little wobbly, he just started going. And he saw that thing move over toward that sign. And he went on a beeline, and he hit that thing smack dab dead on. Because what you stare at pulls you in. That's what happens with Lot. And we know that happens because later we see Lot show up again. And he shows up kind of as a footnote in Genesis chapter 14. I'm not going to tell you all this here for the interest of time. It's a very interesting story. Kings go to war. And the king of Sodom and Gomorrah, lose the battle. And so the kings who beat them go into Sodom and Gomorrah and take stuff. They take people to sell as slaves. They take livestock. They take all kind of things. But at the very bottom of it says they also carried off Abraham's nephew Lot, since he was living in Sodom. So we went from watching it to living inside of it. The next time we see Lot show up in the Bible, it's a little bit weird, because what's happening is the angels are talking to Abraham, and they're saying, when we're all done here, we're going to go destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. because they're so evil and wicked, God's just going to destroy them. And Abraham says, well, wait a minute. I got a nephew there. And he pleads for him. So the angels go in to see if they can find any righteousness at all in Sodom. And so we see them show up here. And the angels come in. And they arrive in Sodom. And watch this. Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. Now, if you read the Old Testament, that's a very important place in the city. Do you know what the gateway is? The gate of the city is where the mayor sits and the elders. Because this is where all decisions in the city get made. We see this show up in the book of Ruth and a couple other places. So the people who were in charge of the city had a nice place, their own seats in the gate. He's running Sodom. He went from staring at it to living in it to now he's running the joint. But when he sees the angels show up, he knows they're different. He doesn't know why exactly, but he knows they're different. And so they're getting ready to go on into the square. You can't go into the square. These men will sexually molest anything with legs. And he doesn't want that to happen to them. So he says, whoa, 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 you can't go there. Come to my house. Come to my house. And they said, no, we're going to go. No. Come to my house. Because he knows what's going to happen. They're going to get raped. Gang raped. Because they're new flesh. And so he convinces them to come to their house, He insisted so strongly that they decided to do it. Except what happens is that night, all the gang shows up. The gang rape gang that had nobody to rape says, what happened to those two guys? I think Lot took them. Keeping them themselves, is he? They show up outside of his house. Hey, where are those two guys that you brought? Send them out. We're drunk and we need party. Send them on out. And Lot goes out and says, you don't want them. Have my 2 virgin daughters instead. Now, how do you go from living with Abraham and seeing the power of God manifest so much that you're blessed so far that you have to move away because you have so much stuff, to living in a sick, perverted city and offering your own virgin daughters as a sacrifice to the perversity of the city? How does that happen? How do you go from one to the other? And the answer is really simple. It happens a little at a time. When he first pitched his tent there, if you had told him what was going to happen, he wouldn't have believed you. When Rhett and Link went to LA, they didn't think they'd lose their faith. We got this. All it takes is compromising a little bit at a time. The devil pushes you off God, takes your eye off God, and he will just keep pushing you. And you think you got a light? The devil's laughing. Because he knows what he's doing. He's been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. By the way, the very last time we see him, I can't even read this to you. It's so disgusting and so perverse, but I have to at least tell you what happens. This is the last time we see Lot in the entire Bible. What happens is God does destroy Sodom, and they escape because God lets them out, but Lot's wife can't leave it behind, and she gets destroyed. And so it's just Lot and his daughters in a cave outside of Sodom and Gomorrah where it got destroyed. And the daughters look at each other and says, well, this is no good. There's no husbands for us. How are we going to have heirs? And they see Lot, and they said, there's our answer. And they get him drunk, and they have incestual sex with him, and they get pregnant with him. That's the last time we see any of them in the Bible. What happened? What happened was his daughters grew up with the morality of Sodom and Gomorrah, not the morality of Abraham and Jehovah. They grew up with morality, the society around them. This isn't weird in Sodom. It's weird to us. Oh my gosh, that's perverse and disgusting. But it's not weird in Sodom. This is normal behavior in Sodom. When you start letting society define what is and isn't real for you and what is and isn't okay for you, then you're basically walking away from the Lord. Whatever little light you had, believe me, it is far, far gone by now. This is our problem. Our problem is we're compromising a little bit at a time. And the devil's telling you, go there and be a light. You'll make a difference. Lot didn't make any difference in Sodom and Gomorrah. In fact, Abraham negotiated it down. He actually said to God, if you can find 10 righteous men, you won't destroy it, right? God says, yeah, sure, because he knows who's there. There's nobody righteous. There wasn't 10 righteous men there. I think you can make the argument there wasn't one. So this is what happens. And the devil loves pushing you out there. Oh, no, come on here. Come in the midst of the sinners. You'll be a light. You'll change them. No, you won't. But they'll change you. The Bible says, come away. Be sanctified. Come away. We need to get a relationship with the Lord Jesus. And it needs to be strong. And if we don't have that, nothing you can do is going to change anything that's going to happen to you. The only power that can change this is the power of Jesus. And the only way that works if you're sold out to him and you love him, you truly love him. And if you truly love him and have a relationship with him, there's not going to be nobody can say anything that's going to push you away from him because you know who he is. Here's the thing, because a lot of people think, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to live, the American dream, and then I'll come back to God. But if you live according to what the world tells you to live, then you will get what the world truly offers you. Would you all please pray with me? Heavenly Father, I thank you that you continually warn us against the stupid things that we keep doing, but somehow we keep doing them. I pray that you'll give us the courage to realize you're calling us to be sanctified, to walk away from sin, not embrace it and try to change it. Let us embrace your spirit, your truth, and your wisdom. Let's walk away from the Babylon, Sodoms, and evil places in this world.